on. Do I have to do anything special?
I'm just testing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Who's controlling the music? Ladies and gentlemen, we're about to begin. Please be reminded that the family requests no videotaping of the service or videos or photos on social media. So I would ask that you mute your phones and turn them face down. For everything there is a season, a time for every purpose under heaven. A time to be born and a time to die, a time to cry and a time to laugh, a time to grieve and a time to dance. This is the time and this is the place to celebrate the life of Derek John Rushmore Tyler, beloved father, husband, teacher, colleague, and friend. And on behalf of the family, Catherine and Paul and their families, I would like to thank all of those who have stood by them in this very sad time, both after the accident and in these last days. And as we begin this service, would you stand, please, for the Lord's Prayer? Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done in earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive them that trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. I want you to stay standing, please, for the song Amazing Grace, which I hope Vicky will start us off with. And it's on your program. The words are on your program. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. 'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fears relieved. How precious did that grace appear the hour I first believed. Through many dangers, toils, and snares, I have already come. This grace has brought me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home. The Lord has promised good to me. His word my hope secures. He will my shield and portion be, as long as life endures. Yea, when this flesh and heart shall fail, sing God's praise than when we first begun. Please be seated. Derek lived among us for 38 years. He lived a full life, impacting many people along the way. He had many roles, most importantly perhaps, husband and father to Catherine and Paul, and grandfather to their children, Kieran, Evan, Julian, and Spencer. I'd like to call on Tiffany now to read a tribute from Catherine and Kieran.
I speak on behalf of Catherine and Kieran. Everyone that knows me knows that I prefer to keep things short and sweet, and as Dad's favourite child, I intend to do just that. Many of you knew him as Mr. T, the biology teacher who wore colourful socks, or Mr. Tyler, the squash coach and cheerleader, or Derek, the friend. I knew him simply Dad, my teacher, my protector, my go-to, my hero. I believe that Dad was born to teach. Next to his family, teaching was his passion. His love of anything in the natural world, languages, general knowledge, meant that every day he tested you with what new tidbit he had learned, and if you didn't know it, he passed it on and taught you. Everything that Mum and Dad loved and had passion for, they passed on to us, their children, and then to their grandchildren. And from the unbelievable number of phone calls and messages from so many of you, he passed on his passions to you as well. Dad loved sports, rugby, cricket, track and field, to name a few, and he excelled at all of them. He also loved NFL football, and his favorite team was the Seattle Seahawks. This made for some family rivalry and an interesting evening back in the 2015 Super Bowl, when my team, the New England Patriots, played and beat the Seahawks. I said it then, and I'll say it now. Hey, they should have run it. It's polite to say that my dad was not amused. When our family first moved from Jamaica to Cayman in 1977, Mum and Dad were introduced to the sport of squash. And with my dad's love of anything sports related, I was born. He loved the sport so much that he not only played for himself, but represented his beloved Cayman in many international tournaments, and he also taught many young Caymanians, and took them to Caribbean, US, and Canadian tournaments, making lifelong friends along the way, and always with his beloved Anne by his side. Dad also loved theatre. He loved acting and singing and dressing up in costumes with the makeup and the wigs. Time he was one of the wicked stepsisters in the Cinderella play at the high school, and the time he was the Cowardly Lion and I was Toto in the production of Wizard of Oz, among many other plays that he was in. Another example of his acting was during my squash years. When I was 16, I told my dad to stop coaching me in between games and told him, just talk to me. This is when his alter ego, Helga, was born. From then on, Dad would start by saying, "Hello, my name is Helga," in this ridiculously bad Swedish accent. And this is how he would talk to me in between games to keep the nerves away. We would be laughing our heads off while other coaches and players would be looking at us if we'd lost our minds. That craziness worked for us, and it was yet another special bond that we had. My mum and dad loved to travel, and one of his big dreams was to go to Tahiti. In 1983, everything was in order for us to go. And then a big squash tournament came up and derailed all of those plans. Now, other people would have been annoyed at missing out on a dream, but not my dad. He had me walking on the beach in Barbados at 7 o'clock in the morning to wake me up and get me mentally ready for the finals later that morning. I was 10 years old, and while we walked, he just kept telling me how proud he was of me and said that he would rather be here with me than relaxing on the beach in Tahiti. I'm still not sure I buy that, but that's just how my dad was. Dad tried to bring humour into every part of daily life as much as he could. In July 1999, Dad was in the UK waiting for my mum to get there so that they could attend a wedding and then travel to France together. That's when my son Kieran decided to come into the world early. Mum was here with me and rushed back home, foregoing France to come and meet his first grandson. And every year on Kieran's birthday, without fail, he would remind Kieran, this time, X number of years ago, instead of going to France. That sarcastic humour and his humility never left him. And throughout the last 16 months, his fun spirit was still evident, even on his worst days. We spent a lot of time at the Georgetown Hospital, and in every department, every specialty, and all the different wards, we would end up meeting with past students of his. So often, Dad would be wheeled into a room and someone's face would light up as they would come forward saying, Mr. Tyler, it's so good to see you, sir. I always remember you from high school, and your crazy socks, sir. You were my favorite teacher. I'm in the field I'm in because of you, sir. And my dad would respond the same way to each and every one of them. He would beam with joy and say, oh, that's so nice of you. I'm so pleased for you. And you know, you were my favorite student. Of course, this was never said to them collectively, and it became a running joke for us. After every visit, I would say, Dad, every time we come here, you see a different person. Who was your favorite student? And he would just look sideways at me, shrug, and give that little chuckle. As funny as it was, he was actually being genuine. He loved teaching so much that every student was his favorite. His love of teaching was not limited to the subject that he actually taught, but included general knowledge, world events, and other obscure facts. And believe me, Dad knew a lot of weird facts. When I would go by his classrooms to visit, he would have a room full of students, even at lunchtime or break time, talking about everything under the sun. In 2008, he was inducted into the Hall of Fame for track and field at Trinity College in Dublin, where he attended and met my mother, the love of his life. At that time, he was a hurdler. I tried that sport once, just once. Because of his love of Cayman and sports, in 2018, on National Heroes Day, he became recognized as a pioneer. It was an honor he was truly, truly proud of. He loved his grandsons as well, and would be seen on a nearly daily basis when Kieran was a toddler, pushing him down the road to see the horses in the field near our home. He would also build forts with cushions and covering them up with sheets and play hide and seek with him. He was a great living room fort builder. And sports, always, always sports. He would also take Kieran to the beach, lifting rocks to see what they could find under them, or digging in the dirt, pointing out the different creatures and plants that they would find. Everywhere Grandpa was, you were sure to see his little grandson. He also introduced Kieran to his love of travel. And every summer, he and my mum would take Kieran on some grand adventure. And eventually, as my brother's boys also got older, those adventures included them. I am forever grateful for all the love and sharing of memories each of you has shown to us during this time. The loss of my daddy has been devastating, and I was not ready to let him go. The struggle to come to grips with his death has been very hard, and even as my heart breaks with missing him, I know that he is finally at peace, pain-free, and after 6 long years of missing my mum, the love of his life, they are finally together again. I know he will live on in our hearts, and thanks to all the fabulous memories of him that we have. Daddy, may you and Mummy rest happily together in eternal peace. I love you.
Thank you, Tiffany. What are friends? Friends are the people who stick with you in good times and bad, doing their best to uplift you, to help you, to cheer you, and generally to be a blessing to you and your family. Derek was blessed to have lots of friends, and some friends which were especially close. And now we're going to hear from some of these friends. First, we will hear from Ray Jones.
Thank you, Joy. Ladies and gentlemen, the following words are written on this piece of paper, but believe you me, they come from the heart. It's a privilege for me, albeit a sad one, to share with you my enduring memories of Derek Tyler, a person I, in common with all who came to truly know the man, held in great respect. So how do I personally remember him? For me, he was always a consummate educator, well-informed and immaculately spoken. I found him quick-witted, kind, uncompromising, and always a professional, an accomplished sportsman, and a devoted man. Allow me to share with you some particular enduring memories. My earliest recollection of Derek goes way back over 30 years. He and I happened by chance to be on opposite sides of the net in a game of tennis doubles. During the match, I thought, heck, this guy can play a bit and he's determined as hell. Later it transpired we both worked in similar disciplines in education. He at John Gray High School, me at the then community college. My classes would often contain some of his former students attending college after completing high school. One day, 2 or 3 of these youngsters jovially informed me of something I had in common with Mr. Tyler, a tendency to wear quirky socks. I realized he and I must employ a common strategy, enhance engagements with students by providing something they could focus on, our socks. Indeed, these students further told me my socks were almost as kinky as Mr. Tyler's. Now, that led to a re-evaluation of my socks. I decided to acquire some that would put Mr. Tyler's in the shade. The result was that instead of merely flash, like these, oh, that hurts, I henceforth wore some extremely rash, like these. News of my enhanced wardrobe must somehow have got fed back to Derek by certain students and drew a typically scathing remark from him the next time we met. As I well recall, it went something like, "Hey, Jones, I've heard you're likely to be fired for exposing students to your disgustingly indecent socks." Significantly, I only heard positive comments about Mr. Tyler from students. They loved and respected him. Apart from events such as St. Valentine's Day Mile and Cross Island Relay events, we came into regular contact at Rotary Club Central and the South Slosh Club. I remember so well one particular incident at a Rotary meeting, and I'm sure some Rotarians in the audience who went to Rotary Central will recall it too, involving Derek. As was customary before partaking of the evening meal, the President would call at random upon a Rotarian to deliver the Rotary Grace. And this begins with the words, "O God and giver of all," goes on for a couple of lines and ends up with the phrase, "Help us to serve thee all our days." Most of us Rotarians would commit to memory the grace so as to be able to recite it without hesitation upon being asked. At this meeting, Derek was invited to do the honors. Obviously, he didn't recall the Rotary version, but with no hesitation, he stood up and reeled off in Latin some words I'd last heard as a schoolboy in the dining room. As I clearly recall, he said, "Benedictus us, benedicat." Amen. An eerie silence was followed by an eruption of laughter. His improvisation brought the house down. And there were more laughs at the end of the meeting, on Derek this time, and literally at his expense, when the Rotary Sergeant-at-Arms fined him a few bucks for his maverick, if eloquent, delivery. Derek, for me, was something of an iconoclast. He broke the image mold. Highly professional and immaculately mannered, yet not one to stand on ceremony. I mean, when he swore, he did so in perfect English and in French. And he didn't suffer fools too gladly either, but that he put up with me, for heaven's sake. Apart from his students, Showing patience was not always his greatest gift, but I found him an essentially kind, caring person. He exuded an air of seriousness, but possessed a sharp and often dry wit that could be truly hilarious and never, ever sarcastic. Oh no, never sarcastic. He and often Anne in the old days could be found most evenings at the squash club. He contributed so much to the development and running of the club, coaching the youngsters, organising and competing in tournaments, and managing the club shop and the bar. I once complained to him I was disappointed with the beer selection. He said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, there's no Corona, for example." The next time I was at the club, I saw bottles of Corona in the bar fridge. So after a game of squash, I grabbed a bottle and sat down at the table to enjoy it. Derek comes along, plonks himself down next to me, and says rather sarcastically, "Happy now, Jones?" I replied, "Yes, actually, Derek." "Good," he said. "Now get me one as well, and don't forget to put it on your tab." He was highly respected as a player. Squash was serious fun for Derek. One of my enduring memories of him in this respect occurred one Saturday evening at a fun team tournament he had organised. One team were a player short, and Derek was persuaded literally at the last minute to fill in. His opponent was already warmed up and waiting on court, and Derek was not prepared to play that night, and I can see him now, limping and looking rather worn out onto the court to take on this younger and obviously fighting fit opponent. We then proceeded to demolish clinically in quick time so he could resume his supervision of the tournament. In his day, Derek was a very accomplished player, possessed of a natural talent, a character on court, who quickly won over neutrals in tournament audiences with his skill and also his antics, which never exceeded the boundaries of good sportsmanship. He was a wonderful asset to education and sport, always providing encouragement and setting an example, whether to his students at school or the less talented of us at the squash club. Make no mistake, this was a man who gave of himself. He was always upbeat. I not once heard him express negativity or seek sympathy, not even when coping with the sad vacuum that occurred in his life after losing his dear Anne. And also during that prolonged and tragic period, more recently, when his health had deteriorated to the extent that he lost his mobility. But never did he lose his wit, his courage, or his dignity. Derek has departed this life, but as Catherine remarked on his passing, he's with his beloved Anne now. He's happy. Benedictus, benedicat, Derek Tyler, educator, sportsman, gentleman, and friend. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ray, for that beautiful portrait of your friend. I was reading a poem recently called On the Death of the Beloved, and one line particularly struck me. Your mind always sparkled with wonder at things. Derek was a scientist, and we know his mind sparkled all the time at the natural world, which he was so enthused about sharing with his students. And here to tell us more about this side of Derek is his friend and colleague, Richard MacLeod.
Ladies and gentlemen, I've known Derek for 40 years. I met him when I arrived in Cayman in September '79 to work as a chemistry teacher at the John Gray High School. Derek was a biology teacher there, and he was also head of the science department, so he was my immediate boss. I was immediately impressed by Derek's charm, love of witty combats, and all the other character strengths that he showed. But the main one I'm going to concentrate on is his leadership. He made the department a fun place to work. He was a dedicated teacher. He was also very helpful when there were problems to solve in getting the job done. And of course, he was famous to his students for wearing those mismatched socks that everyone has mentioned. So I know most of us have got those socks. Now, he was interested in all kinds of sports, and he was dedicated to staying fit. But he liked to get us science teachers involved in races, and there were many. The 2-mile fun runs, there was a relay on the Brack, there's 10Ks, including one in Miami, the Valentine's Mile. Derek would get us involved in these. But I'd just like to take one example, the Cross Island Road Relay. This was started by the high school, and it was a big deal to us. A team would have 6 runners, each would run 4 miles. There were 4 houses in the high school at that time. There was dolphin, marlin, tarpon, and wahoo. Oh, right, yes. We have members here. And each house had to put in a team and undergo this grueling race. The staff had some great runners too. 2 of the island's best runners, Alan Jones and Mike Spragg. And they'd put in a very competitive team, which had a good chance of winning. Derek, though, would gather 6 of us from the science department, maybe with a maths teacher or someone with another department, to form a second team. And we volunteered for this, and he got us to practice, and he got us to run on that cold Sunday morning. Our whole team, starting from Gun Bay right into the high school. And I think that shows that was a leader, to be able to get us to do that. Now, another side of Derek, he changed from the academic side to the pastoral side of the high school when he became head of year. And the teachers as well had to have a pastoral side. We had tutor groups, and we registered the students in the morning and had heard their complaints and gave out the notices and things like that. We traveled with our year group. There were 3 of them, so each year you'd go with the same students as they advanced through the school. In September of 2004, Derek was head of the graduating class then, and I was in the same tutor group, and disaster struck. Hurricane Ivan destroyed buildings, caused flooding, cut off power and water to many areas. The high school canteen was completely destroyed, and many of the buildings at the high school were damaged. It was over a month till we were able to start school again. At first, just the graduating class. There was no uniforms, we used different classrooms as we tried to get the students back in step for their exam year. It was Derek's year group, so he had the tremendous task of trying to get the pastoral side of the school back to normal. And this is where his dedication, approachability, and all his other leadership skills were needed, his sense of humor even. The year group really pulled together and worked hard, so we ended up successfully completing the year with good results. We even managed to have a great graduation ceremony and ball. My job was to help a wonderful group of students. Lindsay Japal and the editorial committee had to complete the yearbook. I've managed to find a copy of our yearbook. A lot goes into these. You have people, all the graduating class, their photos, the staff of the graduating class, a little bit about each person, photos from around the school, including like the devastation of the school, and people meeting in little groups. to get through the day. But the year group really pulled together, and despite that great disadvantage, they worked very hard and they managed to successfully complete the year with good academic results. So all that work that went into it, I remember Mr. Marlowe, the physics teacher, getting all the photos done so we could put them in the yearbook. We had students, we had to meet outside quite often in an improvised canteen area. We had to do whatever we could to get through. We had a limited access to computers, and then we had to put the original copy of the yearbook onto that. And that's completion of that year, that devastating year, under Derek's watch, is just my small perspective again on Derek being a great leader and able to gather a lot of people together to work in groups to accomplish something. I'd just like to add, on a personal level, Derek was MC at my wedding to my wife, Vivia. And if Derek was sitting here and heard me say that, he'd have a quick comeback, probably something like, "Of course you got married to your wife." He was also MC at our 25th wedding anniversary, and the jokes never stopped. I was lucky to know Derek not only as a great inspiring leader, but also as a great friend. My condolences to Paul and Catherine, and rest in peace, Derek.
Thank you very much, Richard. And what a retrospective. He certainly took me back to 2005, and I was very much still in education. Now we're going to have an audio tribute from Derek's sister, Angela.
From as early as I can remember, when I was about 3 or 4, and he was maybe 13 or 14, he showed that he had a natural affinity with children. Although they were only 10 years, he would spend time with me and introduce me to things that most 4-year-olds would be oblivious to. Things like going to the White City Arena to watch athletics tournaments, exhibitions on natural history at museums, lectures on Africa, the Commonwealth Institute. We went to stamp exhibitions, films. I was introduced to Shakespeare through Lawrence Olivier and Henry V and Richard III. I do remember being very embarrassed when we went to see comedy films featuring the likes of Norman Wisdom. The wristlet bits went over my head at that age, because Derek would be laughing louder and longer than anyone else in the cinema, often running around in his seat. So embarrassing. He was a born educator. When he was a teenager, he wanted to be a game warden at the Serengeti Game Reserve and was fascinated by all things African. He had huge maps up on his bedroom walls showing regions of Africa, itemizing their many products. He made me learn them and then tested me on them. All I remember now is that they all seem to export groundnuts, whatever they are. Derek was a great practical joker. I was about 6 or 7. We were having a mock fight in the dining room, which was late for lunch with cutlery on the table. We both grabbed a knife and were mock fencing with them. However, I made a lunge at him, and he immediately dropped his knife, clutched his hand, as if I had wounded him. I was terrified to hurt him, rushed up to the bathroom to get an acid and antiseptic cream. When I got back, his hand was covered in blood, and as I started to try to treat the wound, I realized that in fact it was tomato ketchup. I was embarrassed. When he went away to boarding school, I just couldn't wait for the holidays when he returned, and we could resume our expeditions to the local park to catch grasshoppers or go for cycle rides along the river. We lived close to the Thames, spotting birds or riverside creatures. Best of all were the summer holidays with our parents spent in Cornwall, messing about in boats and peering into rock pools full of crabs and sea anemones. I learned the word omototeros, an annelid living on rocks and windows, before I could spell it. In the evenings, he would read me stories and we would sing Johnny Johnny and little baby songs like Wild Man's Lesson or Rock Island Line and Rock Around the Clock. Sorry kids, you have to Google those. Did you know Derek was in the singing band when he was at school? They entered a television talent contest. Didn't do very well because the string of the key chest bass broke in the middle and caused such hilarity and chaos. Even when he went away to university to Trinity College Dublin, he didn't ignore me. He just sent me press cards, and when I was 11, he took me over to Dublin for a holiday, my first holiday without parents. I felt so good enough. We stayed in his student flat with his flatmate John Birmingham. It was actually a rather damp and dark basement of a lovely Georgian house outside Dublin overlooking the sea. I remember that we had Chinese food every day. Chinese restaurants put on especially cheap student menus, so we had 3-course meals every day for 10 days. My mother always liked interesting food. So, you see, I have wonderful childhood memories of my lovely brother, and I really missed him when soon after Paul was born, and very over to Jamaica, other side of the world. But whenever we meet up again, he would always reduce me to tears of mirth, some silly expression or funny story. All these years later, it's been hard for me to see him so much a shadow of his former self. We have kept in touch through one's WhatsApp, and I'm so glad that I was able to reminisce with him about the good times we shared. These have been just a few of the wonderful memories I have of my lovely brother, and I shall miss him very much. And you miss him.
Thank you to Angela, and I hope she hears that we thanked her. We're now going to have a little change of pace, and I'll ask Vicky if she will now give us her rendition of the beautiful hymn, Ave Maria.
Just briefly, because I'm a little nervous, I'm stepping in for my mother, who would have loved to have done this if she was not in the UK at the moment. I was Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz when you were Toto, and your dad was the Cowardly Lion. There was one night when the wizard, who was supposed to be behind the curtain, was in the back, I think, enjoying a beverage and had not realized that he was supposed to be coming out. And I was there with the Tin Man and the Cowardly Lion going, "Where's the wizard?" And no sign of him. And your father was trying to improvise, going, "He doesn't want to see us. We're going to have to go." And we're yelling as loudly as he could so that the wizard would know we needed him on stage ASAP. And the other memory I have of your dad is, yes, he used to MC the sports days when I was a student. I was an absolutely terrible athlete. My name and athlete should never be put in the same sentence. But my mother was the head of Tarpon House, which was interesting because she was a terrible athlete. And at sports days, even if you came in last place, you got 1 point for your house. So when one of the athletes didn't show up, Mum would throw me into anything. So I would end up doing the 100 meters, the discus, pretty much anything that a student didn't show up for. And I will always remember your father. And again, in last place for Tarpon House, Vicky Wheaton.
Thank you, Vicky. Maybe you can't run, but you can sure sing. And you represented your mother admirably. Derek influenced many people. He had many friends, and we're going to continue the tributes and hear from some more friends, from John Elliott and then from Charlie Adam.
Good afternoon, friends and family of Derek, Mr. T. Sorry. We met Derek and his family in 1980. He was out of Jamaica, we were out of Africa. We bought a plot. Sorry?
John, it's okay. We're all there.
We bought a plot of land in Newlands, just a few doors away from Derek. Thank you. Read, please. Other bits.
Our three children were similar ages to Paul and Catherine. The 80s were early days in Cayman for TV, but the Tylers had a satellite dish. I fondly remember Thursday evenings when Anne and I used to wander down the road to the Tylers and watch LA Law, leaving our children to watch a VHS tape from the tape club. Sunday was American Football Day. This was all new to us, but Sunday evenings, it was American football on Derek's garden pitch, which had a wet swamp in one corner, and dodging the chickens. We used a chicken as a football once, and it flew. And he was never afraid to give us a shove out of bounds, if it meant helping his team defend. After all that exercise, it was a barbecue in the backyard, and the chicken bones were being thrown to the dogs, lots of dogs. Derek had lots of animals over the years, even Chinese curly feathered chickens that would roost in the house on the back of the sofa. The Tyler family were serious football fans. Derek introduced me to the real US football with our families while we were in Miami. Seattle were playing Miami Dolphins. We sat in the nosebleed rows. As a soccer fan, I was pleasantly surprised to see that there was no aggro between the two sides of the fans. Then it became tradition to watch the Super Bowl together each year. It didn't matter much to me who won, but it did to Mr. T and to Catherine. My oldest grandson, who played cricket for Wiltshire Youth, fondly remembers talking to Mr. T at great length about England and county cricket, what had been happening, who had been playing well, and who should be in the teams. All my children remember being taught squash at the South Sound Squash Club and being run ragged by Mr. T, along with a lot of other juniors. Newlands was home to the North Sound Golf Club, and Derek and I were life members. 9-hole, par 3, very narrow course with balls ending up in the swamp or the water hazards. We spent many a fun evening there, but Ivan took that all away from us. Derek was an active Rotarian and a charter member of the Rotary Club, Grand Cayman Central, introducing me to the club in 1987. Derek, Richard McLeod and I ran together the Cross Island Relay, the Valentine's Mile, or a half marathon. We also trained together on Poindexter Road when it was just a dirt track between any development that came along the road. A slow jog out and a fast road back. Those were the days. Memories, some lovely memories. That's what we had to thank Derek for. And today we remember the family man who liked to teach others at school, on the squash club, and to recall the details of a football or cricket match as if it had just happened yesterday. Derek, we will miss you. Rest in peace with your much-loved Anne.
Somebody else who's...
Just this.
Good afternoon. Previous speakers have alluded to Derek's many talents, his friendships, his sense of humour, and many other things. What I would like to highlight today is his commitment to particularly squash. Derek Tyler was a man born with squash in his DNA. There was no facet of the game in Cayman that Derek was not involved with. Initially, he played and coached in the... I'm sorry, I'm going to have to put my reading glasses on. I have to walk with one pair and talk with another. Initially, he played and coached at the Downtowner Club in Georgetown. Some of you may remember that. It's a long time back. In March 1984, Derek and his wife Anne, with others, were co-founders of CASRA. That's the Cayman Islands Squash Rackets Association. It's now better known as South Sound Squash Club. Derek served on the board in several capacities, including president on 4 occasions, helping the club grow into one of the finest, if not the finest, squash club in the Caribbean. He organised, as we've heard already, many squash tournaments and also monthly club leagues. And even though computer programs existed to do this, Derek chose to do it the old-fashioned way, using a pen and paper. That was very much Derek. He was involved in coaching beginners and juniors, not only on the court, but also, very importantly, mentoring them off court. He took many teams to many international tournaments, too many to mention. As a player, he was a determined, competent, and crafty player who represented Cayman at Cayman Championships as a veteran. Caribbean Championships, sorry. He fought fiercely for every point, and in later years gave many younger players a good game. Derek was always willing to help out wherever and whenever needed. just highlighting his commitment. He helped behind the bar, he refereed, he proofed the newsletter, he ran door security, sold tickets and raffle tickets. He and Anne opened the squash shop, supplying rackets, shoes and other equipment to everybody. He was truly a man for all seasons. The only time his probity could be called into question was when, every 4 years, during rugby or football World Cups, he would organise a sweepstake to raise funds for club programmes. Each participant would pay $10 and be assigned a team in the tournament at random. The winners and runners-up would win a part of the pot, with the rest going to club funds. However, Derek was known to fix it. I'm sure many of you know ardent Scotsman John Pitcairn. Derek would quietly say to him, "Don't worry, John, I'll make sure you don't get England." For his many contributions, Derek was greatly respected and loved, and squash in Cayman owes him an enormous debt, and he will be greatly missed by us all. Farewell, Derek. Goodbye, Mr. Squash.
Thank you, John, and thank you, Charlie. Perhaps nowhere was Derek known and loved as in the classroom. Simply put, teaching was his life, his vocation. His students responded to his funky socks and his quirky sense of humor, all a part of making his science lessons come alive. And here to tell us something of Mr. T, the teacher, is Cindy Scotland, a past student.
Good afternoon. Thank you. Let me start by offering condolences to Paul and Catherine and their families on behalf of my family. I also offer condolences for all of Mr. Tyler's students from the Cayman Islands High School, and especially those from the class of 1984. We can all attribute the foundation to much of our accomplishments and success to date to the positive influences teachers like Mr. Tyler and others from that generation had on us. When Paul asked me to say a few words about his dad as a past student, I immediately said yes. I also promised I would not cry, and so I will do my best. If I do believe Taran, Gloria, Jennifer, Louis, there are quite a few here from 1984 that can continue. Speaking about Mr. Tyler is not a sad topic, and certainly I could not think of anything that made me feel sad, except, of course, that he is no longer here with us. Inspiring, friendly, loving, genuine, fun, and I mean fun. I didn't know adults could be that much fun. Approachable, caring, attentive, and witty. These are some of the words that I am sure many other past students would use to describe Mr. Tyler. Mr. Tyler came from that generation of expatriates who did not just come to work, but he made a life here. He lived with us and among us. He didn't care whether you were a local or expat, and he certainly didn't care what color you were or what your social standing was. He simply cared about you, the student. The success of his students was his reward. He cared not just about how well you did in biology, but in every class. He certainly mentored me many days on chemistry and physics. And I was his favorite student. Hence why Paul asked me. I remember when my oldest daughter was considering A-levels and we visited prep school's open house. As we walked into the science lab, he laughed and immediately began to tell her stories about when he taught me. I am glad he shared only the best stories. He reminded her that every level of education was more difficult than the previous one, but that as long as she worked hard and was committed, Success would be her reward. Mr. Tyler stood out from most teachers in many ways, but one that I am sure every child would remember was his socks. The more flamboyant they were, the happier he seemed to be. When you didn't see them, he would put his foot up on the desk. I can see him sitting on the edge of his desk and folding his legs so that we all could see and, of course, comment on his socks. They were certainly the topic of many conversations during and after class. In fact, every time I see a very colorful pair of socks, he's the first person to come to mind. My relationship with Mr. Tyler also went beyond the classroom, as I, as well as many others, were also friends with his children, and in my case, his son Paul. Now, I won't get into those stories. In recent years, I would run into Mr. Tyler quite often, either at Countryside or Burger King at Peanuts gas station. We never missed the opportunity to have a quick chat. I will miss those. There are so many stories that I could share about my relationship with Mr. Tyler, because after all, I was his favorite. But I think it's important for Paul and Catherine to also hear what others think. So in preparing this tribute, I asked a few classmates to share some of their fondest memories of Mr. Tyler, all of whom shared similar stories. Don Seymour says, "I recall science was one of my most difficult subjects. Having to do the homework on my own was even more challenging, and detentions were frequent. But Mr. Tyler found that balance between love and discipline to lead me through. I feel lucky not just because I was one of his students, but of him as a father of Paul, with whom I shared many wonderful life experiences." You don't want to know those stories either. "He was inspiring and enriched many of our lives, not only professionally as a great teacher, but personally with his sound fatherly advice and wisdom. He will be forever missed, and I hope his family and friends find comfort at this difficult time. Rest in peace, Mr. Tyler." Nasaria Suku remembers, "I remember Mr. Tyler most for his electric socks and amazing performance as Pharaoh in the musical Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat." Remember, Victoria? "I was a member of the chorus and looked forward every night to his rocking performance in full Elvis ensemble. He wasn't my teacher, but the few times he covered for Mr. Murray, he just made science come to life." Gloria Glidden recalls, "I also remember Mr. Tyler for the amazing performance in Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. I certainly was not a natural at drama, but through his encouragement and support, I performed well. He was a true inspiration and always made learning fun. He will be forever in our hearts." Jennifer Hunter says, "Mr. Tyler was one of those teachers that you never forget. He made learning fun and would always brighten your day with his witty comments and quirky charm. He had a way of making every student feel special, and his care and concern for the welfare of his students was always evident. I witnessed these same wonderful qualities again many years later when he was teaching my son biology towards the end of his career. We all have our own special memories of Mr. Tyler. In my case, whenever I happen to hear the Eurythmics playing on the radio, I smile as my mind immediately drifts back to high school days, with Mr. Tyler often calling out to me, "Hello," I won't sing it, "Hello, Jennifer, with your orange hair and your green eyes." Rest in peace, Mr. Tyler. You have left a lasting positive legacy as a great teacher. Rohan Small says, "For me, he made learning fun and science understandable and relatable. He was caring, attentive, and made it a point to know each of his students. He was also flexible and tailored his teaching approach to ensure that we all got it, given our individual learning abilities. I will always remember his bright, colorful socks. These and his love for his students and the profession reflected his personality and will be part of his legacy. We will greatly miss him. Andrea, and I will mess up Andrea's last name, but Andrea Famu says, "For me, Mr. Tyler made biology accessible. His demeanor was friendly and approachable, yet he was incredibly knowledgeable. Also special was our reconnection decades later when he tutored my boys for their biology's GCSE exams. Mr. Tyler's legacy is the indelible mark he stamped on multiple generations of Caymanians. He will always be thought of fondly. Paul and Catherine, your dad was one of a kind. I pray that God will grant you the strength and the hope you need to get through the difficult time. Mr. Tyler, you will forever be in our hearts. Rest in peace, and may God perpetual's light shine upon you." Thank you.
Thank you, Cindy. And there you have it right from the horse's mouth, what the students thought about Derek and his 38 years in the classroom. We have heard from family, friends, and students about Derek, and now we will hear an overview of his 80 years on earth, 38 years of which he spent in this community, by someone who knew him best, his son, Paul Tyler.
Now, my sister loves to tease that she is the favorite child. But I do like to remind Catherine that I am 6 years older than her, and I remember the truck dropping her off. Just in case. So, wow. I think actually Catherine stole my speech by the looks of it, because she covered it fairly well. But my father, Dad, didn't work a day in his life. But how could he, when he loved what he was doing with every fiber in his being? I hear the memories today and look at all of us gathered here, the posts on Facebook, the comments, the calls, and that's a testament to a man who hasn't worked a day in his life. When news of his passing spread around Cayman and beyond, we heard from so many detailing the love they had for him and how much he had made a mark in their life. Your love was received and reciprocated. He loved Anna. Why, he loved Anna. So, did he know in England, married to a wee Irish lass, Anne, when he decided to quit a successful publishing career and become a teacher, that he would never work again a day in his life? I think so. I think he really did. Because he lived his life doing what he could do to make a positive impact on others, no matter the cost to himself. He truly gave of himself. All his success was simple, came from one thing: treat everyone the same. I mean, Cindy just mentioned that. He did. Yeah, well, unless he was playing Mervyn Cumberland squash, then he was definitely not losing to him there. Or playing Yahtzee. I can tell you, that man loved it all, but he loved to win more. We have several backup pairs of dice, because he would lose and throw the Yahtzee dice through the window. Yes, my father loved to win, but he loved to teach, and he loved his students more. In 1968, he and Mum, with a 6-month-old me and a basset hound named Ulysses, took that step. They moved to Jamaica, Lucy, for a 2-year stint at Russey's High School. Well, that soon turned into a 52-year stint, and he was never one to return to England. When things became hairy in Jamaica, instead of going back to England, he decided to come to Cayman. And with 2 young children, the one that got dropped off in the truck and myself, we moved to an island that we'd been coming to for several years through Rotary in Lucy, Jamaica. And he assumed his rightful role here in Cayman as a teacher, a mentor, and a guide. He would continue to do that for another 42 years at various high schools, Cayman Islands high schools, class of 84, at John Gray Middle School, and Cayman Prep. And then when finally, he had to retire from Cayman Prep, he continued tutoring. He continued tutoring until he was in the accident in 2019. It was here in Cayman that he found his home, and he shall be here forever. Dad loved his students, though. We heard from Cindy earlier, and his greatest joy was running into them. Man, my mother would get so upset, because a 5-minute trip to countryside would turn into a half-an-hour conversation, because he would run into everybody, and he knew their names, he knew the year they graduated, and what were you doing, and how were you doing. It was his love, his need. And then parent-teacher conferences. I saw Jenny here today. He would come home after parent-teacher conferences and call me up and said, well, we had Jen Reed here today, and Brian Hunter, and we had such and such a person. And it was great. We talked for 2 minutes about their child. We're doing good. And then spend the rest of the time talking about us. He had a smile. He had a step in his life that his students were him. But it was here in Cayman that he got renowned for his funky colored socks, which I don't usually put my pants up like this. It's not since the 80s anyway, but had to show them off. And those socks were loved by everyone. But I can tell you one person who loved them the most, me. Because I had a lot of fun in the 80s, which is why Cindy wouldn't tell stories. And I remember one night that stands out for me. I was coming home from 7 Mile Beach, going east, and cop cars pulled me over. The blue lights come up. I might have been going a little fast in my old BMW. Might have been. Anyway, I get pulled over. I'm like, oh, man. And the policeman come up on his light, and he's shining in the car, and he says driver's license, insurance, and I pass in my driver's license. Paul Tyler? Your daddy not Derek Tyler? Yes, that's my dad. Oh, man, I love your daddy. He was my favorite teacher. Him still wear those funky color socks? I go, yes, he still wears them. He buys them all the time. Oh, man, well, you tell him that, and I'll reserve the name so nobody gets in trouble, that I say hello, and Paul, just don't drive so fast next time. Yes. Those socks were loved by all, but especially by me. And that was him. That was what his name was. But it was his role as a dad, and later in the years, with Catherine and myself, and then his grandkids, where he truly excelled. He took Katie and I on brave adventures. I remember in the ponds around Jamaica, he would hold the flashlight, and I'd catch the toad. Yes, there was for biology lessons. Yes, that was so many fun. He would take us to Wisconsin, and we'd go in the creeks looking for crawfish. And he would pay my children 50 cents a crawfish that they could find. And Kieran. What he didn't realize is that the kids only found 2, and they kept on recycling them. I think he owed $20 that day. Yeah, they caught up to him pretty fast. But he made us try different things outside of our comfort zone. He always pushed us. Push was his thing to Catherine on the squash court, but he pushed us in life to make us better, though it did take me 20 years to get over raw octopus and eat sushi again. He never judged us. He always accepted us for what we're doing, and even when I called him at 2 o'clock in the morning to come from an next session, and he would come down in his little Toyota Starlet and pick me up, and it would always take about half an hour to get out because, Mr. Tyler here. Hey, Mr. Tyler, you have your socks on? And everybody would gather around, and all the students and everybody he knew at 2 in the morning would want to speak to him. Our love was full, our house was full of love. I'm struggling here. I'm trying to do good. And our home of 42 years in Savannah is filled with those memories that continue to hold us through these times. and he loved his grandkids. And those who today may have seen me, I put an octopus in his coffin with him. Because every year, Kieran, his eldest, would travel with him and Mum and Dad to visit us in Minnesota, where I am now living. And my dad would walk through the door, and one of my kids would go, "Octosqueeze!" Yes, Octosqueeze. It didn't matter how worn out he was, he had even traveled all day. They would grab him, squealing and laughing. They would drag him down to the spare bedroom. Octosqueeze was a game where they'd all jump on him on the bed, and then he would grab them with his arms and his legs and squeeze them like an octopus. My kids lived for those days when he'd come. And then my youngest, Spencer, this summer when I came home and we knew that Dad was probably, on his last lap around the sun, asked me to give him one. So we have an octopus, so he can always have Octosqueeze for the rest of his time, think of his grandkids. So, though the cancer that finally took my dad away couldn't be treated, the man fought to the bitter end. He did not want to go. He wanted to stay. We talked often about it, about other miracles of people that have had similar diseases and similar prognoses, and how they fought it. And he fought every bloody second of it. He still had too much to give back to Cayman, he said, his home. He had still had too many lives to help. But unfortunately for us, he was obviously needed more in heaven. And he went to join Mum, his Anne, on December 22nd. His passing has left a void in the lives of so many in Cayman. And we all gather here today to mourn my father. But instead, let's remember him, because he will never truly leave us. We can still see him in the eyes of his grandchildren. And my kids at home, hi, they're on camera, in the lives that he impacted here while teaching for 38 years. And in our hearts and our memories forever. Finally, isn't it appropriate that Dad will be buried on our Heroes' Day long weekend? How fitting it is to start the weekend by remembering a Caymanian hero. Dad, I love you.
Thank you, Paul. You were very brave and very good. Derek has forever touched us, and in that way, he will be with us always. Our memories of him, many of which you have heard, and the many legacies he has left, will make us smile again when we think of him. After this ceremony, we will leave this place and meet at the Prospect Cemetery, where we will, with great respect, commit our friend's body to the earth, deeply grateful for the life that he lived and our connection to him. Derek, we honor your journey through life. We remember with gratitude your deep love for Anne and your children, your family, your friends, your colleagues, and the organizations of which you were a part. We remember your funky socks, your sense of fun, and ability to laugh at anything. And most of all, we remember how you loved life. We remember your incredible ability to make friends from all walks of life, your kindness and your generous heart, and the respect that you showed to everyone that you met. We are grateful that you have been a part of our lives, and may you travel safely into this next part of your journey. Our love goes with you. What a gift it has been in our lives to know Derek Tyler. He was a warm and generous man. He was gentle yet strong. He had a quality of life we are all challenged and inspired to emulate. Derek will always be with us in spirit. He will always be in our hearts. This part of the service is now concluded, and I'm going to ask the audience, when the body is taken from the hall, if you will please stand. And once the ushers have left, the exit will be led by the family and the front rows. If you are going to the Prospect Cemetery for the committal, please drive with your lights on. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for your attendance this evening, for all the good wishes that you have given to Paul and Catherine and the rest of the family. Thank you very much for your attention. Good afternoon.